Hello and welcome to a podcast about murder. I'm Jem and I'm here with Freya for the second episode of the season. If you missed the first one, you should go and check that out as soon as humanly possible, obviously. So today we'll be discussing one of the most infamous and gruesome murders of France. This brutal murder shocked the nation and captivated the public. The case was at the centre of works by many French intellectuals such as Jean Genet, Jacques Lacan, and Jean-Paul Sartre. I am, of course, referring to the murder committed by the Papin sisters in 1933. Have you ever heard of this case?
I have heard of this case.
Yeah.
I don't remember a lot about it, though. But I do actually remember that there is some quite gruesome details, I think.
Yeah, it's an incredibly violent murder, which is why it's so
famous, yeah.
Let's just get right into it. In the town of Le Mans, which is not far from Paris, on the evening of the 2nd of February 1933, the Lancelin family, consisting of parents René and Léonie and their daughter Geneviève, were invited to a dinner party. Having spent the day out playing cards, Mr. Lancelin returned home, only to find the door locked and the lights out. Assuming his wife and daughter had gone to dinner ahead of him, he made his way over to the party. When he arrived, however, he was surprised to find that they weren't there. Growing increasingly concerned, he returned to the family home and began incessantly knocking at the door, receiving no answer despite the light being on in the maid's attic room. Mr. Lancelin then decided to go to the police station. He returned with 3 police officers who were able to enter the house through a window at the back. The officers then stumbled onto a horrific scene. On the landing lay the severely beaten and mutilated bodies of Mrs. Lancelin and her daughter. There are pictures of the crime scene that I guess we'll put up on the YouTube version, and I mean, they are mutilated, but the quality of the photo isn't that great. So if you're sensitive to that kind of material,
can we put those up? Is that like?
I mean,
are they really bad or?
No, I mean it's like you can see some bodies on the floor.
I guess I'll make an executive decision when I edit it.
So yeah, if you're sensitive to that, I guess you wouldn't be listening to this podcast, but you maybe don't want the visual, so just as a heads up. They had been beaten and stabbed to an extent that made them almost unrecognizable. Allegedly, their skirts had been pushed up and their underwear removed. A detail that became almost legendary in the case was the fact that their eyes had been torn out while they were still alive and had been strewn around the murder scene.
That's what I remember about this.
And I don't know how they could tell they were still alive.
Usually when it's stuff like that, it's like the blood was still flowing. So that's how it is. I don't really know the specifics, but that's what I think it is.
Yeah. Officers would later note that the way in which the bodies had been mutilated resembled the exact same way people were advised to prepare rabbits to cook. So precise cuts, bleeding the bodies, removing the eyes.
Right.
Knowledge that, people who would be cooking for a rich family would know, such as their maids.
Ah.
But we'll get into that in a bit. Horrified, the police officers continued their investigation of the house, heading to the attic, which housed the family's maids Christine and Léa Papin, fully expecting to find the sisters similarly murdered. Unable to unlock their bedroom door, the police called upon a locksmith, and this is just my thoughts on the thing. This is a pretty sturdy door that 3 grown men couldn't knock it down.
Wow, that's a sturdy door.
Yeah. I just found that a strange detail, that they had to, bring someone in. But anyway. So the locksmith was eventually able to unlock the door. Upon entering the bedroom, the officers found the sisters side by side in bed, on some accounts naked, although it's hard to confirm.
I heard that as well.
A bloody hammer with strands of hair still stuck to it was found next to the bed. The sisters confessed almost instantly to the murder and were immediately taken into custody. So I'm just going to get into the sisters' background for a bit here.
Cool.
Christine and Léa Papin were born to Clémence Teagray and Gustave Papin in 1905 and 1911, respectively. They had an older sister, Amelia, born in 1901. Clémence and Gustave divorced in 1913 after Clémence discovered Gustave's incestuous paedophilic rape of Amelia.
Whoa.
Yep.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it took a turn real fast.
Wow, that went from 0 to 100 in very quickly.
So makes sense for her to divorce him following that.
Yeah, go girl.
Amelia was subsequently sent to an orphanage before becoming a nun, and it is presumed that she spent the rest of her life in a convent, although very little is known of her.
Oh.
Due to their traumatic familial situation, Christine and Léa were not raised by their parents. They spent most of their childhood with relatives, earning their keep by doing their necessary chores, before finally finding work in the employ of the Lancelin family. Christine, who had been hired originally, requested that her sister join her. On top of the whole situation with their father, I read that their mother was... she wasn't considered to be very maternal and was sort of very cold and distant with them and was basically making them work so she wouldn't have to look after them.
Wasn't it something where the mother sort of saw them as like they would have to go out and work to give her money?
Yeah,
so she
more
would
or
kind of
less.
just she expected them to go and work and then send almost all their money back to her.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah. Originally, I think she was the one who got Christine the job with the family and sort of made a deal with the wife. And also she's sort of depicted as, we don't know if Amelia was Gustave's daughter. She was very unfaithful to him during their marriage, which I don't think is relevant, but sort of paints a picture, I guess. Christine and Léa, following an act of kindness from Mrs. Lancelin, came to view her as a maternal substitute, apparently referring to her as maman in private. However, other accounts of their relationship paint Mrs. Lancelin as an incredibly demanding and violent mistress, often doling out extreme corporal punishment for minor mistakes. Their biological mother, Clémence, was said to have been very uncaring towards her daughters and remarkably unmaternal, which is what makes me think that it wouldn't be unusual for both of these statements regarding their relationship with Mrs. Lancelin to be true. I think that due to their background, it must have been hard for the sisters to form clear boundaries in their relationships and to sort of know when punishment isn't a form of love, in a way. So I think due to the fact that their own maternal figure was at best absent, or at worst similarly abusive in the way that Mrs. Lancelin would appear to them as a maternal figure, it makes sense to me that it would be sort of confusing for them. Regardless of the psychological aspect of this relationship, it seems clear from what I read that Mrs. Lancelin wouldn't hesitate to physically reprimand the girls, although I also assume that this was considered normal at the time.
Yeah, when was this again? This is like
the 30s.
30s, yeah.
I read somewhere that on more than one occasion, Mrs. Lancelin smacked the sisters' heads into walls.
Oh.
Which is slightly over the top to me.
Well, yeah.
But I guess there's once you've accepted. Yeah.
But that's pretty hardcore.
Mrs. Lancelin was said to have been incredibly demanding and would regularly perform tests to verify the cleanliness of her house.
Such as?
So she would wear white gloves and go around checking for dust and stuff.
Oh, what a psycho.
I mean, it's so unnecessary. You can tell if your house is dirty.
Well, if you have any knowledge of British TV and you remember How Clean Is Your House, you'll know
I remember How Clean Is Your House.
That is not true. And actually, What's-Her-Name would completely disagree with you.
It's true.
Well, I like to imagine when I saw that program that in their real lives they were slovenly bitches, just totally didn't care at all about stuff like that, and that was only for TV.
My brother and I were obsessed with that.
But they probably would come in with their glove and go actually,
swipe.
7 million types of bacteria live here.
The sisters are said to have shared an intense and codependent relationship with each other. They would rarely leave the house or engage in social activities with others, preferring to spend all of their free time alone together. Christine, the elder sister, was said to have a more dominating personality, whereas Léa would rarely speak for herself or affirm any kind of distinct personality. In fact, from what I could gather, the two would only receive their orders from Mrs. Lancelin, so they had no contact with the other family members. And Mrs. Lancelin would only give them to Christine and written down. And then, so there was no, conversation, really, between them.
Okay.
So then Christine would pass them on to her sister. So that leads me to believe that there was very little contact with the younger sister and the outside world. Her experience of the world is only in this house with her sister.
So very isolated.
Mrs. Many have even speculated that the two shared a sexual relationship, which seems confirmed by the remarks made by Christine following their arrest, which I will get to in a little bit. Most of what we know about the murder came from the sisters' own accounts. When the police found Christine and Léa in bed, Christine confessed to the crime, although claimed it was in self-defense. Her words would be the basis for the popular interpretation of this crime as symbolic of class warfare. I would rather have killed them than have been killed by them. So I'm translating from French, and it's just not the same. It doesn't have the same gravitas.
Oh, okay.
But at the time of the murder, the sisters had been working for the family for 6 years. Christine was 27, and Léa was 21. According to Christine, Léonie and Geneviève Lancelin had returned to the house before the party around 5:30, finding the house in darkness. Apparently a fuse had blown due to a faulty iron. Not expecting the family to return home before the party, the sisters had decided to wait until the next day to repair the broken fuse. Mrs. Lancelin was furious to discover the house in this state, and an argument broke out between her and the sisters. According to Christine, Léonie became violent towards the two of them, therefore confirming their reported self-defense, although this is of course difficult to confirm. The altercation pushed Christine over the edge. She smashed a pewter jug into Mrs. Lancelin's head. Rushing to her mother's defense, Geneviève began fighting with Christine, who reportedly screamed, "I'm going to kill them." When Léa arrived to help her sister, Christine apparently told her to rip out Mrs. Lancelin's eyes, while she did the same to Geneviève.
Ooh.
Léa complied with her sister's orders. Christine then rushed to the kitchen to fetch a hammer and a large knife. The sisters then spent an approximate 30 minutes further mutilating their mistresses' bodies before retiring to their attic bedroom, where they were found hours later by the police.
Wow. Intense.
Yeah. Also a strange reaction to have, the ripping out of the eyes.
I'm just trying to think of like a reason why that would appeal to them specifically, but I can't really. I think it's just like such an anger that was there that I think I think it's just based in the sort of pure like rage of the situation. Or maybe like often when usually it's not like cut out eyes or something like that. It would be something like their eyes were covered. Sometimes the killer, the psychological explanation for that is that the killer doesn't want to be seen committing the crime that they're committing, or like they have a sort of aversion to being seen doing something that is wrong, I suppose.
That's true. Some people speculate that it was because actually she had returned home and sort of found them in the middle of some kind of sexual intercourse.
Then that would make good sense, I suppose. I mean, it doesn't make sense, but like...
No, but like that could explain it.
Yeah.
Following the murder, the sisters were imprisoned and separated. As a result of their separation, Christine's mental state rapidly deteriorated. In July 1933, she had to be put in a straitjacket following attempts to gouge out her own eyes.
So this is obviously a thing for her.
Yeah. But I don't know if that's just because she gouged out their eyes. Do you know, like...
Don't know.
I don't know if it's just she's got this underlying obsession with
eye gouging.
Eyes.
Yeah.
Officials apparently allowed her to meet with Léa in order to calm her. During this encounter, Christine reportedly unbuttoned her blouse and threw herself at her sister, crying, "Say yes, say yes."
Okay.
Yeah. Some accounts describe her fondling her breasts and genitals, although these are not confirmed.
Okay.
It's hard with this case to know how much of it is sort of embellishment, because it's been so
long as well. It's like folklore.
It's been so long. We've like with these old cases, a lot of elements sort of get blown out of proportion, and also so many people have adapted this event to like literary scenarios. To many, this behavior demonstrated a sexual incestuous relationship between the two, which. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd reach that conclusion if I saw that. That's the same thing I'd think.
This supposed relationship is further supported by Christine's reported claims during her imprisonment that in another life she had been, or would be, her sister's husband.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's not just a weird, perverted, sisterly bond, but in her mind, she is her husband. So there's a lot going on psychologically After this one encounter, however, Christine's attempts to see her sister stopped, and she even stopped mentioning her name. Their trial began on the 30th of September 1933. 40 journalists were gathered in the courtroom, which shows just how famous this case had already become. 3 doctors had been appointed by the court to determine the sisters' psychological state, and amazingly, it was concluded that the sisters had no psychological pathologies.
Okay. I'm going to go right ahead and just disagree with that, but...
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert, but...
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like normal behaviour to me.
Yeah, I don't want to disrespect their credentials or whatever, but that just does
Were they
sound
just
a
like,
little bit...
women?
Yeah.
You know how they get. There were, however, mentions of a diagnosis of folie à deux, which is a shared psychosis with symptoms such as paranoia, auditory hallucinations, unusual sexual behaviour, and sort of inventing a threat that requires some form of self-defense. Which I can believe. And it sort of tends to happen between, obviously, 2 people who are in a sort of very dependent, isolated relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting. Obviously, I've heard of that phenomenon, but I hadn't heard it framed as like the usual thing is that a threat is invented against the 2 of them. Well, that is definitely it, but like I just never heard that expressed.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought of it in that way either, but it makes sense. Furthermore, testimony during the trial revealed a family history of mental illness. An uncle had committed suicide, and a cousin was in an asylum. So again, I'm not buying the fact that they had no...
is just baloney, to be honest.
After the trial, jurors needed only 40 minutes to reach a verdict. They were, of course, found guilty. Christine was sentenced to death by guillotine.
God.
Our old friend.
I actually remember when you told me that it was only stopped in the 70s. It's like, oh man, France is out of control.
Yeah, it's a weird place. Although her sentence was later changed to life imprisonment, which is pretty progressive for the time. But I guess maybe it's because she's a woman.
I think because of the womanness and maybe their young age as well. I mean,
well, she's 27.
Actually, she's 27. The other one's the younger one. Maybe there was some dispute about the mental health.
Yeah. Although she wasn't put in like, originally she wasn't put in an asylum or anything. I don't know. Léa, who was determined to have been under the influence of her sister, received 10 years imprisonment.
Okay.
Which is like...
I guess I see that she wasn't the instigator. And yet 10 years seems quite a short amount of time to be involved in something like that. I think it's true that actually, like, without her sister, is she even a danger to anyone? Probably not. No. She's just someone who's easily influenced by that specific person.
Yeah, I get that feeling as well, because she seems not apathetic, but just very ready to sort of do whatever her sister tells her to.
Yeah, so I guess as long as they're separated, she's not really a danger to others.
Yeah, and I guess maybe they'd been able to sort of observe her in prison by herself and sort of determine that she wasn't really a risk in that sense. And again, is it because she's a woman?
And the younger one.
She's barely an adult. Christine's mental and physical health rapidly deteriorated in prison, separated from her sister. She became depressed and experienced occasional fits of schizophrenia. She was eventually transferred to a mental institution in Rennes, where she starved herself to death.
My God, can you do that?
Apparently.
I just don't know that you could actually... I mean, I just would assume like your instinct would take over at some point, but I guess
because
not.
they were also, I assume, force-feeding her.
I guess now that I say that, I think about, people do die of like anorexia and things like that. So I suppose it's possible to starve yourself to death. It just seems so like unusual when you hear, oh, she starved herself to death. It's like, God, that takes commitment.
Yeah.
That's not easy.
Well, she died of cachexia, which is, from the very brief research that I did, is basically like a wasting disease where you've put your body in such a state of starvation that even if you went back to eating food, you wouldn't fully recover.
Oh, wow.
I think.
That's big.
I might be wrong about that. So she's sort of pushed it to such an extent that there's no...
I can see that being like an extreme like ketosis or something like that.
Yeah.
Like where it's just, the body is just in a state where it's just going to eat itself no matter what you give it.
Yeah. But yeah, so she died of cachexia on the 18th of May, 1937, aged 32. Léa, on the other hand, was released after serving 8 of her 10 years. She apparently went on to live in Nantes under a fake name, working as a hotel maid. Although some accounts state that she died in 1982, Claude Ventura, a producer working on a film entitled In Search of the Papin Sisters, claimed to have found Léa Papin living in a hospice centre following a stroke in the year 2000. This woman died the following year, in 2001. So it's mad to me that she just went on to live a normal life.
Well, that sort of goes back to what we were saying about, like, without the sister, maybe she is just completely normal.
Yeah.
And it's just this one person sort of spins her out of control. Their relationship is just too intense.
Yeah.
And, can't be managed.
I did read in some accounts that her mum got back in touch with, she lived with her mum for a bit after prison.
Oh.
But I wasn't really able to confirm that, but that would be kind of an interesting
development.
Yeah. But I think in other accounts, she went to live with this elderly couple and they sort of passed her off as one of their children.
Oh.
So good for her, I guess, that she was able to... Well, not good for her. She murdered a woman. But...
I guess it's like we were saying on the last episode as well. We were talking about what is the goal of... of imprisonment. It's, at the end of the day, it's to reduce crime. And if it's to reduce crime, then the goal should be to rehabilitate people who have committed crimes. And if the situation calls for it, separate them from society for either a period of time that they are a danger. But like, if they're not a danger anymore, then surely we should be happy that they're living law-abiding lives that we know nothing about.
Also, I think there is a case to be made for her autonomy isn't the word I'm looking for, but like her desire to commit murder. I don't think she's like a murderous or violent individual.
More of a follower, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Also, she's released during the war, so I think France has got other things going on.
Other things to worry about, probably. Yeah, I wonder was she released for such good behaviour, or was she released because it's just a bit of effort to keep a lot of prisoners manage a country when you're at war?
In any case, the Papin case became infamous at the time and was debated by many intellectuals such as Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Jean Genet and Jacques Lacan.
Wow, your pronunciation is incredible. It's almost like you speak French.
Some considered it to be representative of the exploitation of workers. Simone de Beauvoir stated that she believed the sisters to have been united in an erotic love and victims of an archaic society that had turned them into murderers. Jean-Paul Sartre interpreted them as heroines consciously rising up against the bourgeoisie to battle injustice, which I think is pushing it a bit too far.
You know, in English we just call him Sartre. Which is just even more hilarious when you say it in the way that it really is. And then I think back to all the people going like, Sartre. It's like, where's the A come from as well at the end? Because it took me a second to think of who you were talking about.
Yeah.
So he said what about them?
He was like, oh, they're consciously rising up against the bourgeoisie to battle social injustice.
That's quite amazing.
And I'm like, I don't think...
I mean, it is taking it a bit far, but it's also like, it is an unusual circumstance because they were maltreated, but that doesn't make the crime excusable.
Yeah. But I think de Beauvoir's statement that it's this archaic society that has turned them into murderers is accurate.
Yes, yeah.
In terms of their upbringing.
That's the middle ground that I would gravitate towards. It's not exactly like a glorious thing to do, but it is a result of being maltreated in a society that doesn't value your life.
Yeah. So this case has served as the inspiration for many works of art, most notably Jean Genet's play, The Maids, and more recently, apparently, I mean, I haven't seen it, but Bong Joon-ho's film Parasite, that recently won an award at the Golden Globes. So it's funny that it's still influencing the media today.
Yeah.
So that's the case of the Papin sisters, a case that remains one of the most striking and infamous murders in France.
Such an interesting relationship there between the two killers.
And I guess it's interesting at the time that I'm not 100%, but I think at the trial, experts were just like, no, that's just sisterly love. And I'm just like,
that's a very normal sibling relationship that I'm seeing. I also rip off my shirt and run towards my siblings, throwing my naked body onto them.
But no, I feel sad for them and the circumstances in which they lived.
Yes. But
I mean, this is the thing, I don't feel like bad for anything, for their punishment or what the sort of sentences they received.
No, especially as they didn't end up getting a death penalty or anything like that. I suppose it's only right that that at least Christine should be in prison for the rest of her life or whatever. But but I do get a sense of like, well, they're a victim of their kind of circumstances.
Anyway, don't forget that we are on social media. On Twitter at About Murder, on Instagram at A Podcast About Murder, and on Facebook, A Podcast About Murder with no E. So go connect with us.
Yay, connect with us. And send us an email if you want to. We could be
pen pals.
We could be pen pals. A podcast about murder at outlook.com is the address. Oh, I actually want to say something that I didn't say in the last episode, which is that officially, a few weeks ago, the podcast had been heard on every continent of the world, except for Antarctica. So sort your shit out, Antarctica.
Yeah. Get with the program.
Get listening. So that was super cool to see that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
The last one to go was Africa. That's why we finally broke Africa. We're basically like celebrities now. International celebrities.
Oh yeah, baby. Look out.
Look out, watch out, world. Here we come. So that's cool. Very grateful to everyone who listens and supports through leaving a review. Hint, hint. Leave a review. Mm-hmm. Say it's 5 stars.
You know, those sweet, sweet comments and subscriptions.
So hopefully we'll be back next week with another case.
And that's that on that.
And that's that on that.
No, we look forward to seeing you next week, where Freya will be hosting. Yeah. And in the meantime, hope you have a great weekend.